It took 12 seconds. That's how long the entire encounter lasted, from the moment Austin Metcalf touched Karmelo Anthony's shoulder to the moment the knife went into his chest. 12 seconds at a high school track meet on a rainy Wednesday afternoon in Frisco, Texas. 12 seconds that ended the life of a 17-year-old boy and sent another teenager to prison for the next 3.5 decades. There were nearly 24 witnesses. There were coaches on the field. There was a resource officer nearby. It happened in the middle of the day, in public, surrounded by people, and Austin Metcalf still didn't make it home. If you're new here, subscribe now. We cover cases like this one every week. The facts, the evidence, and what actually happened inside that courtroom. All individuals referenced in this video are presumed innocent unless formally charged and convicted in a court of law. Karmelo Anthony has been tried, convicted, and sentenced. The facts presented here reflect testimony and evidence admitted at trial. This is what happened. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old and living the kind of high school life that looks effortless from the outside, but is built on years of work. He was a straight-A student and a standout football player at Frisco Memorial High School in Texas. By all accounts, he was a natural athlete, the kind of kid coaches point to when they talk about character on the field. He was competitive, driven, and close to his family. But the detail that keeps coming up in every account of Austin Metcalf is this: he was a twin. His brother Hunter was his other half. They did everything together: sports, hunting trips with their dad, the ordinary rhythms of growing up side by side. Their father, Jeff Metcalf, describes them as practically inseparable. Two boys who shared a birthday, shared a sport, and shared the same circle of friends. On April 2nd, 2025, they were both at Kuykendall Stadium in Frisco for a track meet between Memorial High School and Centennial High School. It was supposed to be a routine athletic event, a normal Wednesday. Austin Metcalf never came home from it. His father, Jeff, got the call from Coach Jackson. He lived close enough to the stadium that he arrived before the paramedics had even finished working on his son. He saw Austin's face on the gurney. He saw the blood. He said later that he has seen death before, and he knew in that moment his son was already gone. At the hospital, Austin was officially pronounced dead. The cause: a single stab wound to the chest that pierced his heart. Hunter Metcalf was in the locker room when his father found him. He was hysterical. It took Jeff Metcalf everything he had just to calm Hunter down enough to get him into the car. On the drive to the hospital, Hunter said to his father, "Dad, I saw his eyes roll back in his head. I saw his soul leave his body, and mine went with it." Austin Metcalf was buried before his 18th birthday. Karmelo Anthony was also 17 years old at the time of the stabbing. He attended Centennial High School, which was the opposing team at that day's track meet. He and Austin Metcalf had never met before April 2nd, 2025. Anthony had no prior criminal record. There was a mention at his bond hearing of a previous incident at his own school in February, described by the Daily Mail as an altercation. But it was handled internally by the Frisco Independent School District, and no charges were ever filed. His father was asked about it at the bond hearing and gave answers that observers described as evasive. The full details of that incident remain unclear. What is on the record is this: on the day of the track meet, Karmelo Anthony brought a knife. The knife had a fixed blade, meaning it wasn't a folding pocket knife. Its blade measured just under 5.5 inches, which put it inside the legal limit under Texas law, but in violation of school policy. His defense attorney, when later asked by reporters why Anthony had brought the knife to the track meet, said only that it would be irresponsible to speculate on the reason. No explanation was ever offered to the jury. No explanation has been offered publicly since. Anthony's parents, Kayla Hayes and Drew Anthony, stood by their son throughout and after the trial. They believe he acted in self-defense. After his conviction, they gave interviews stating they felt the case was unfair, that witnesses lied on the stand, and that the defense attorney failed their son. They also said they believed race played a role in the outcome, pointing to what they described as an all-white jury, though trial reporters and Austin's father both confirmed the jury included Hispanic, Asian, and Middle Eastern jurors. April 2nd, 2025. Kuykendall Stadium, Frisco, Texas. A track meet is underway between Frisco Memorial High School and Centennial High School. Athletes, coaches, and support staff are spread across the grounds. During a rain delay, competitors from both schools take shelter under their respective team tents on the sidelines. Every team has its own tent. The tents are clearly marked: team colors, uniforms, school insignia. There is nothing ambiguous about which tent belongs to which school. Karmelo Anthony, a Centennial athlete, leaves his team's area and walks under the Memorial High School tent. According to witness testimony presented at trial, a mutual acquaintance had waved him over, but that detail did not change what happened next. Austin Metcalf, sitting with his teammates under the memorial tent, told Anthony he needed to leave. He wasn't in the right place. What happened in the next 12 seconds was recorded on video and documented by nearly 24 witnesses. When Austin told him to go, Anthony reached into his bag, opened it, and put his hand inside. He then said to Austin, "Touch me and see what happens." Witnesses say Austin then touched Anthony's shoulder, a push witnesses described as not even enough to make him take 3 steps back. And then Anthony pulled out the knife and stabbed Austin Metcalf once in the chest, 1 strike, direct to the chest. The knife went deep enough to pierce the heart and drive into bone. Anthony then ran. As he fled, he discarded the knife in the stadium bleachers on the north side. He did not have it on him when he was detained. Austin Metcalf collapsed. His twin brother Hunter ran to him and held him in his arms, pressing his hands against the wound, trying to keep him alive. Witnesses said Hunter was screaming and praying simultaneously in the rain. It didn't matter. The wound to the heart was unsurvivable at the scene. Medical experts would later state that even with immediate surgical intervention, the chances of survival were near zero. A wound to the heart means blood pumps directly into the chest cavity. Without surgery within seconds, a person dies from internal hemorrhage and loss of oxygen. Austin was still alive when paramedics arrived and took over from Hunter. He was transported to a hospital. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The investigation began at the scene. Officer Eduardo Cortez, a school resource officer, was near the north end of the track when witnesses pointed him toward Anthony. Cortez found Anthony on the track, separated by a chain-link fence. He instructed him to raise his hands. Without being asked a single question, Anthony spoke first. He told the officer, "I was protecting myself." A moment later, as Cortez began walking him off the track, Anthony said, "He put his hands on me." When Cortez radioed that he had the alleged stabbing suspect in custody, Anthony heard it and responded, "I'm not alleged, I did it." That statement, spontaneous, unprompted, and captured in the arrest report, would become significant at trial. Officers photographed blood on Anthony's hands at the scene. A short time later, the knife was recovered in the bleachers where it had been thrown. Officers found it and immediately moved to cover it with a tarp to protect it from the rain, using a nearby backpack to weigh the tarp down. They later discovered that backpack belonged to Anthony. Approximately 24 witnesses, student athletes and coaches, gave statements to police. Their accounts were largely consistent. Anthony entered the wrong tent, refused to leave, made a verbal threat, and stabbed Austin Metcalf after being physically touched. The medical examiner's findings confirmed what witnesses saw. Austin died from a single stab wound to the chest that penetrated the heart. There were no defensive wounds. Austin Metcalf was unarmed. In the days that followed, the Metcalf family became targets. Austin's mother, Megan, had her home swatted 6 times. anonymous callers reporting emergencies at her address, triggering SWAT team responses. Jeff Metcalf received hundreds of death threats by text and phone, and a stranger appeared at his home and began banging on his door. He called police. He said he did not know how anyone was sleeping, knowing people could find them, and were that angry. Karmelo Anthony was arrested at the scene. He did not flee the stadium. He was detained on the track and transported to a police vehicle, where he asked officers whether the victim was going to be okay, and whether what had happened could be considered self-defense. He was charged with murder. His family retained Dallas criminal defense attorney Mike Howard. Shortly after the arrest, a fundraising campaign was launched on GiveSendGo. GoFundMe had removed an earlier campaign because of its policy against raising money for individuals accused of violent crimes. The GiveSendGo fundraiser raised well over $400,000 before it was taken down after the guilty verdict. The platform stated the fundraiser had been created to cover pretrial needs, and those funds had been dispersed for legal defense and family relocation. At a bond hearing, prosecutors questioned why Anthony's bond should be reduced from $1 million to $150,000, given how much money had already been raised. The defense argued the family needed resources to survive. Anthony's father, Drew Anthony, urged the court to consider his son's lack of criminal history and good character. When asked about the prior school incident in February, he declined to elaborate. Bond was eventually set, and Anthony was released pending trial. Anthony pleaded not guilty. His defense was self-defense. The trial took place in Collin County District Court under Judge John Roach of the 296th District Court. Judge Roach made the decision to bar cameras from the courtroom, a decision that drew significant criticism online, though the judge stated publicly he stood by it. The prosecution called approximately 21 witnesses. The defense called 6. The state built its case on physical evidence, the recorded statements Anthony made at the scene, and the testimony of witnesses who had been under that tent. Multiple witnesses testified that Anthony entered the memorial team area uninvited, was asked repeatedly to leave, made verbal threats, and pulled the knife and stabbed Austin Metcalf after being touched. Several witnesses specifically testified they heard Austin tell Anthony he did not want to fight, that it wasn't even worth it. Moments later, Austin was dead. The prosecution presented the knife, a fixed-blade weapon just under the legal carry limit, and established that Anthony had brought it to the meat inside his bag and chosen to reach for it during the confrontation. Prosecutors also played Anthony's own words back to the jury, his spontaneous admission to the resource officer, and his question about whether what he had done could qualify as self-defense. The defense argued Anthony was surrounded, felt threatened, and acted to protect himself. They pointed to the fact that Austin Metcalf had physically touched Anthony first. They argued the prosecution could not definitively prove Anthony intended to kill, only that he intended to use the knife. There was no testimony from Karmelo Anthony. He did not take the stand. In a self-defense case, the defendant's account of their internal state, their fear, their perception of danger, what they believed in that moment, is critical evidence. Without Anthony testifying, the jury had no first-hand account of what he says he was feeling. His father told interviewers after the trial that based on the law, Anthony didn't need to testify because the burden of proving self-defense wasn't on the defendant. Legal analysts who followed the trial largely disagreed, pointing out that a defense attorney's closing argument is not evidence, and that the jury needed to hear from Anthony directly to assess whether his fear was genuine and reasonable. One of the defense's own witnesses at trial reportedly had a closer relationship with the prosecutor than with the defense and testified that Anthony had been the aggressor. That witness, called by the defense, effectively aided the prosecution's case. The defense also raised an issue during jury instructions, arguing that the judge should not have included a charge telling jurors that if they believed Anthony was the aggressor, he could not claim self-defense. That instruction would later be cited as a potential grounds for appeal. If you've been following this case from the beginning and you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On the question of guilt, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of murder. Not manslaughter, not involuntary manslaughter, murder. In Texas, the punishment phase follows immediately after the guilt verdict. That same jury, within hours of convicting Anthony, heard from both sides on sentencing. The range available under Texas law was between 5 and 99 years, or life. Karmelo Anthony's mother came in to plead for mercy. Both sides had waived opening statements in the punishment phase. The defense presented what it had. Jeff Metcalf delivered his victim impact statement. He slammed his hand on the table. He told Anthony to look him in the eye. Anthony, he said, never raised his head during the statement. Then Hunter Metcalf, 18 years old, the boy who had held his brother in the rain and watched him die, walked to the podium. He asked Anthony to look at him. Anthony looked up for approximately 4 seconds, then looked back down. Hunter, calm and direct, told the court what had been taken from him. He walked back to his seat without breaking down. His father watched him and said later he had never been more proud of anyone in his life. The jury sentenced Karmelo Anthony to 35 years in prison. Under Texas law, he must serve at least half his sentence before becoming eligible for parole, meaning he could be released in approximately 17 to 20 years, somewhere in his mid to late 30s. Anthony cried when the verdict was read. After sentencing, his parents and supporters in the gallery got up and left before the proceedings concluded. Anthony remained at the defense table alone to hear the remainder of the sentence handed down. His father was not present for the victim impact statements or the final sentencing. Jeff Metcalf, watching from across the courtroom, said he actually felt sorry for Anthony in that moment. Judge Roach later told a Dallas television station that he stood by the verdict, that the jury was selected properly and listened to the facts, and that Karmelo Anthony seemed like a decent young man who committed a crime and now understood the consequences of it more clearly than he ever had before. Karmelo Anthony is currently serving his sentence at the Wallace Pack Unit in Navasota, Texas, a minimum security facility with roughly 1,500 inmates, about 3.5 hours from where Austin Metcalf was stabbed to death. Anthony filed a notice of appeal almost immediately after sentencing, describing himself in the filing as unable to afford an attorney and requesting court-appointed counsel. His parents have said publicly they are looking for new legal representation. Potential grounds for appeal being discussed include the composition of the jury, whether the aggressor instruction given by the judge was appropriate, and broader questions about whether the defense was effective. Appeals in cases like this take years. The Metcalf family will live with that uncertainty. Jeff Metcalf told reporters that when the jury was deliberating on the sentence, someone asked him what he was hoping for. He texted back, "That my son will walk through the door again." That was his answer. Not a number of years, not a death sentence, just his boy. Austin Metcalf was 17. He was a straight-A student. He was a football player. He was a twin. He hunted with his dad and his brother every season. His father still goes back to a video Austin made when he shot his first buck. The interview Jeff filmed of him. The smile on his face, the way he talked through it, like it was the greatest thing that had ever happened. Jeff Metcalf says, when that video came up on his phone while he was sitting alone in the woods this past winter, he couldn't see through the scope for 2 hours. Nobody wins here. A 17-year-old boy is dead. Another teenager will spend what is almost certainly his entire adult life behind bars before he sees the outside world again. 2 families are permanently altered. Hunter Metcalf watched his brother die in the rain at a track meet when they were both 17 years old. He will carry that for the rest of his life. The case is closed in court. The grief is not. If you want to follow along as this case develops, the appeal, the ongoing fallout, the stories that don't make the headlines, subscribe to Crime Vault. We're here every week. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Austin Metcalf, 17 years old. Remembered.